Clearly, the DoD has taken the lead in securing their supply chain with CMMC, and that's why many of you are here today. CMMC compliance, or meeting cybersecurity mandatory minimums, stands directly in the way of any revenue opportunities with the Department of Defense. So it's mission critical for national security and anybody who wants to do business with the Department of Defense. So who better to help us understand CMMC than author, CEO, and CMMC AB Vice Chair, Jeff Dalton. Jeff will be joined by Eric Noonan, CyberSheath CEO, and I think you'll find the discussion and topics insightful and actionable on your journey to CMMC compliance.
Okay, Jeff Dalton, thank you so much for joining us. Julie, thank you for that wonderful introduction and sharing Jeff's background. Jeff, I want to jump right in because I know your time's valuable, and I really kind of want to get right to this. This is a session I know many people in our audience have been looking forward to. And First question out of the gate, frankly, being on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accreditation Body, the Cmmcab. Yeah, it really is. In addition to that, from the outside looking in, frankly, it looks like a pretty thankless mission. So tell me, what drew you into it initially and what keeps you going?
Well, thank you. Great question. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to finally be talking to you, Eric. Maybe from the outside it looks like that, but it really isn't a thankless mission. I was so excited to get involved with this because it was a way that I could really take so many of the skills I'd learned throughout my lifetime, going all the way back to the beginning to working for large companies and being a CIO and a CTO and development lead manager and all those different roles I played over the years and finally running my own company. It was kind of like a culmination of all of that. And there was a call put out for people that had, those kind of skills. And I thought, wow, this is such a great opportunity to give back. I love my country so much. I'm a very patriotic person. I really like to give back when I can. And, what a problem to solve. I mean, this is a problem that is it's a nationwide and national security problem. That's the problem of our age. And it's a tough problem to solve. And there's many different angles and many different tools and many different approaches. And I get to be involved with one of them, a big one. And it was a very exciting opportunity to not only get involved with something where I could really help the country that I love so much, but also meet and work with some of the most amazing, smartest, most capable people and most patriotic and dedicated people that I've ever met in my life. So it may appear to be thankless, but every minute of it is a joy.
Well, that's, touching on that theme of kind of national security and doing really something that needs to be done for the country. And there's, I don't know if there's a bigger problem set to try and attack than kind of generically cybersecurity in the supply chain. So it's one that if we can get this right, I think the CMMCAB and the entire ecosystem can really move the ball forward significantly.
I think so. Yeah, it's a really interesting problem because it's multidimensional. It isn't just about national security. That's a very big part of it, but it's about capital. It's about intellectual capital. It's about there's a financial perspective. There's an intellectual property perspective. There's a copyright perspective, and our adversaries are attacking us on multiple fronts simultaneously. And it's what makes the problems, so critical and so interesting to solve because it's multivariant and there's so many different parts of it and they all have to come together.
That's actually a great segue to my next question because I think that this ecosystem has brought a lot of diverse perspectives, opinions, solutions to the table. Some of them have made it to CMMC, some of them have not. But one that is very deeply embedded within CMMC is something you have a deep background with, the Capability Maturity Model Integration, CMMI. How did that experience lead to you playing such a prominent role with the CMMC rollout? And what can cybersecurity leaders who aren't familiar with CMMI, what should we take from that?
Sure. Well, from a foundational perspective, the CMMI and the CMMC have many similarities. They're obviously both models, and the definition of a model is sort of a view as to what good means, right? It's a definition of goodness. And the cool thing about maturity models is it gives you an evolutionary path to improvement. Because even though we tend to think of this as one big monolithic problem to solve, it's really a problem that beginners need to solve at their level, and then more intermediate performers and then more senior, more experienced performers. They need to solve different problems at different levels of their evolutionary paths. So the model itself is a really interesting way to do this. It's not, you hear people say, oh, it's just what we don't need another framework. It's not really a framework as much as an evolutionary path to performance improvement in whatever it's about. So CMMI is about engineering. CMMC is primarily about cybersecurity and some engineering. So, the first part of it is the foundational piece is very similar. The really bigger piece for me was the ecosystem model was very similar. So, a lot of people have said to me, why don't we just put a model out in the street and, train a few assessors and have them go at it? And the answer to that question is 300,000. That's the answer to the question. Right? Because you can't just, put a book out on the street and say, everybody read it and then go off and solve the problem. If you're an engineer, and I think you have an engineering background, imagine it's 2026 and 300,000 companies have become assessed in level 3 of CMMC. What do you think that took? Well, it took thousands of assessors, which meant thousands of trainings, which means tons of training materials, which means examinations and people to review them. It means quality control. It means C3PO operations, including marketing and sales and invoicing and billing and all of those things. It includes a long pipeline of people who aren't assessors yet that are going to become assessors because we're going to need so many of them. And it's an ongoing audit process. And there's literally dozens and dozens of things that have to be in place for an ecosystem like this to be successful. So when people say, "Oh, it's just another framework," I'm like, "Well, hold on a second. The model is an important part, but it's only one part of the overall ecosystem, and it's the ecosystem that makes it real. The model, a standalone, is a great book. It's a book, though." And, not a very exciting book to read. It's not Game of Thrones, right? But it's the ecosystem part of it is really cool. And I was on the board of the partner board of the CMMI Institute for a long time. I was their chairman and for about 10 years. And, I got a lot of exposure helping them grow that and make that business what it is today, which is very successful, and fantastic CEO there as well. And so that part of it is something that I'm really interested in. I'm an architect, a software architect by trade, so I'm always really fascinated by these ecosystem or architectural models. And so that part of it was very similar. So I feel like I brought some of that to the table.
There's a lot in what you just said, but one thing, and, I consider myself pretty up to speed on kind of CMMC and where it's going and kind of where it's come from for sure. But you said something I hadn't heard before, which I think is potentially super interesting and helpful more than anything to people in the audience today. Many times I hear conversations, well, CMMC wouldn't have stopped SolarWinds. It wouldn't have done this. It wouldn't have done that. And it's just always kind of from the negative. But, you said something about it being a model and that, different people, whether they're at the beginning, they're more advanced or they're super advanced, can kind of pick up the model at different places and they have kind of different needs in where they are in the model, right, and where they grow into the model. And I think that's not a perspective I've heard, but I think that's a great way for somebody to look at it. So rather than saying, well, 130 requirements or, whichever level, and thinking of the big primes and all the resources they may have, for a small business, taking the view of, well, this is where I am in my maturity. How can I use the model with my resources? I think is a great perspective.
Yeah, that's the entire purpose of a maturity model, is to provide an evolutionary path to improvement. Because as much as we all want to think of ourselves as, 5-star performers, most of us aren't. And, I've been doing CMMI appraisals for about 20 years. And before that, I was, played all kinds of roles in technology. In CMMI, we don't have a level 1, but level 2 is the first one for some reason. I don't know why. And I always say to my colleagues, level 2 is where it's at. In CMMC, level one's where it's at. If you look at a lot of the breaches and a lot of the problems companies are having with cybersecurity, it's not like really sexy stuff, technologically speaking. It's simple stuff like they guessed your password, or they use social engineering techniques to get you to reveal it, or it was a phishing scam. All of these things are like level one. And so many companies don't have level one figured out, even though they might have in place some aspects of more advanced cybersecurity protection in place. A lot of the basics are missing. And this is true in CMMI and it's true in ISO. We tend to get focused really on this more interesting and exciting, let's call it, stuff to work on. And we kind of sort of soft pedal the things like, have we trained people right? And, what are all the different, procedures for signing into the building and badging and all of these things that really are responsible for a lot of the breaches and problems that we have. So I love CMMC being a maturity model like that. And I get asked this question a lot about solar winds too. Would CMMC have stopped solar winds? And the answer is, we don't know that. We don't know, right? But what CMMC does do is it gets us all talking about this problem of cybersecurity. And we weren't talking about it before. We, those of us that work in the field have been trying to get the attention of senior management for how many decades now? And trying to get funding and trying to get federal government to pay attention to it. Well, you know what? Now they're paying attention because there's a mandate in front of them. And if the mandate for CMMC did anything, it got everybody saying, oh, we have to pay attention to cybersecurity. Because when they say we need to get CMMC certified to bid, what they're really saying is we have to mature our cybersecurity profile in order to bid.
Yeah, and I think it was a brilliant, and I'm unaware of any other requirement anywhere that ties revenue as directly to cybersecurity basic hygiene. So the idea that you have to meet these mandatory minimums prior to contract award, prior to being able to kind of receive this revenue, it's a great way to drive change across an enormous supply chain.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hear people complaining about it quite a bit. And I just wonder, I'm like, well, how should we go to market in the supply chain, right? Yeah. Should we go to market without protection? So I don't know. It's just a funny conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it was better before.
Right.
And I think I'm sure you've heard all of this, right? But so in that, and I think you're coming up on a couple of years now. What's most surprised you during your tenure on the CMMCAB?
It's been the passion at both ends of the spectrum. There's an intense passion both for and against it. There's people that are like, wow, we have to do this. This is so important. We had 150 people join our working groups voluntarily. Of course, the board members were all volunteers. We had an unprecedented amount of interest in the RP program and the RPOs. I mean, we have 3,000 or 4,000 people that are part of the ecosystem now. And, the growth of the business has been amazing. And for any first year startup, the other end is the people that don't want it, and they're equally as passionate. And, you only need to go as far as LinkedIn to see that passion. Right. Yeah. And, sometimes it just gets downright, humorous, but, the amount of passion both for or against has been amazing given the short amount of time that we've been operational.
Yeah, it is relatively short. And I've been in and around this for a long time, back when it was a voluntary set of requirements in 2008, 9, 10, and then it kind of morphed into 2015, the DFARS, and then it was self-attestation, but without an SPRS submittal, and now all the way to CMMC. And what I think is fascinating about that, and I've kept close to my heart throughout the journey, is the why behind CMMC. So whether it's right or wrong and the controls are right and why isn't this there, the why behind CMMC, and you touched on this earlier, kind of in how you feel about the country. I think it's unquestionable, but in your words, why is this so important?
Well, this is so important because we all have to get on the same page. Whether CMMC is fully correct or not is beside the point. Whether it's being implemented exactly how you would have implemented is besides the point. The point is we have a starting point, and the way they started it was brilliant, starting it with a maturity model that is by definition self-improving and updatable and improvable, and treating it as an evolutionary path where companies can start in one place and move up to another is brilliant. Really, when you think about the big picture, it's besides the point whether it's right or wrong because it can be improved and fixed once it's in place. So, it almost doesn't make any difference what model they put in place. I mean, the CMMC is great, of course, and it was written by great people. But the point is now we're all focused on it. And that was the intention, right, to get us all focused on it. And it certainly has done that. So I don't know. I think that we need to focus on getting this ecosystem off the ground, getting people connected to it, starting to do assessments, and then providing feedback back into the AB and the DoD on the experience so that we can make improvements and have continual improvement around it. I tell my CMMI clients that, it doesn't make any difference what process you put in place because you're going to improve it. Just put something. If you have nothing, put something. And something is better than nothing, usually, in this case. And some protection is better than no protection. It doesn't make any difference. Put something in place and then constantly improve it over time and make it better and better over the life, the life cycle, until you get to the point where you're really doing a great job.
No, that kind of common sense sometimes an uncommon virtue, but I agree. And I use the health kind of health and wellness analogy all the time. Like, I don't know, maybe you should walk, maybe you should run, maybe you should do a HIIT workout. There's a lot you can do. Just start with something and then improve upon it and then improve upon it.
Now, that's funny you say that because I've struggled with weight my whole life. And I had a friend that said, why don't you just park your car further away? Right. And I did that. And he said, why don't you stop taking elevators? And I did that. And now I go to HIIT classes and CrossFit and, run and do all that stuff. So you got to evolve. You can't just, all these people that are saying, we want to be CMMC level 3. And I'm like, that's great. Really, that's really good. We want to be level 3 tomorrow. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. Right. Because it's evolution and it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, and of course, any more than you'd roll off the couch and qualify for the Boston Marathon.
Right.
You wouldn't just start with level 3. But the great thing, again, to the model is that you can work your way into it and kind of measure your progress as you go.
Sure. And there are companies in the world that are level 3 now. A lot of the bigs, run very, very active. And if they've been through NIST 800-171 assessments and audits, they probably are performing at level 3. But unless you've had that formal audit process in your history, chances are good that there's missing components that need to be addressed. So level 1 is a great place to start.
Now, with level 1 and level 3, obviously one of the big differences is CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. And a big focus for the Department of Defense has been on specifically the efforts to improve the protection of CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. My experience is that few, if any, contractors really know what CUI is. And if they have it, they don't know where it is on their network. Is there a chance that this whole effort is kind of being scoped too narrowly in a way that assumes a sophistication that few companies actually have in terms of identifying CUI?
Yeah, I don't know if it's being scoped too narrowly as much as people define it too narrowly. There's a lot outside of CUI that is contained within CMMC. There's a lot of things that don't have anything to do with CUI that are contained within CMMC, and we need to focus on those things as well. I mean, the practices in level 1 and level 2 are very important, and they result in, from my understanding, I don't do stats on this myself, but from people that do tell me that the vast majority of infiltrations are, level 1 and 2 practice related. In other words, the type of controls that are in level 1 and 2. But of course, it's just like with the CMMI, people want to focus on the higher maturity stuff because it's more interesting for them to work on. But the other part of the problem is I don't think that people really understand how to recognize CUI. Obviously there's people that do, and there's a lot of the big companies especially, but especially as the data gets pushed down to the second and third tier suppliers, I'm not sure that they even know they have it on their networks. So it isn't really anybody's fault. It's just that they haven't had the experience and the training to really recognize it. And frankly, the government hasn't always explained it well enough for them to really get it. And so I think we're going to see a couple of years of struggle with helping to identify, and probably some surprises when assessors go to see like, say, a tool and die shop or something, and say, wow, are those the schematics for the entire wing assembly? Oh yeah, they gave it to us because they wanted us to size the screws, and then all of a sudden, then it all comes out. So I think we're going to have a few years of learning and a lot of clarification. But again, I hate to say this to people, but it's besides the point, right? Because the point is that without us going through that, we never would have learned. So let's learn it, and let's, take the punches now and get it figured out, and let's keep moving forward. Yeah,
perfect is definitely the enemy of good in this case. Yeah. You can study this thing, and maybe to some degree, parts of the government and economy have studied it to death without any action. And if nothing else, and I just think that, over the last 10, 12 years, the progress was glacial from kind of 2008 to 2015, the first DFARS. It happened, but it took forever. And then if you look at CMMC, I think was released in January 2020, law changed September 2020, 9 months. That's just, that's a historic pace. And so there's going to be some learning along the way, as you say, but we're better for it as a country, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there were a lot of moving parts, and, obviously with any startup activity, whether it's the AB or the CMMC or the new PMO office or Katie Arrington's operation, all of those things were new. And so anytime you have new activity and a lot of rapid activity, you have, some level of chaos and some level of rework and some level of confusion and misunderstandings. And that's how any startup on the planet works, right? So I was always surprised when I hear people say, boy, it seems chaotic over there. I'm like, well, no kidding. We're all working 300-hour weeks and running 100 miles an hour. Of course there's going to be chaos, but it's really actually gotten very focused. The last 6 months have been very focused on all sides, and all pistons are really firing.
Yeah, and I think that that analogy to that of a startup is a good one, because any startup, you're expecting things to get done quickly, but I don't even think it would have been as quickly as it got done, which I think is, in my lifetime, just amazing for the size of the problem that we're trying to solve is incredible. So I think hats off to a lot of people who, frankly, put a tremendous amount of effort into it in all the years leading up to this, and also in the last couple of years. There really is a group of people who cares deeply about this problem and is working hard to solve it.
Yeah, I almost feel like we're crossing the starting tape, of a race. Like the race starts when everything goes operational. But we've done the warm up, we've done the workout, the pre-work, gotten ourselves into shape, and we're just about ready for the race to kick off.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that means the soreness comes tomorrow, but that's okay. We'll get better for it.
That's right. Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur and a business owner yourself, I love to ask this question. So tell us how you would approach something like CMMC compliance if you were faced with something that stood in the way of your future revenues. Yeah. You didn't necessarily have a deep bench internally, if any bench at all, around cybersecurity or understanding the regulations. Where would you start and why?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked this question about CMMI all the time, and I think it's the same answer. I've given this some thought. This sounds somewhat heretical, I guess, but don't open the book. Don't read the CMMC model. Don't get hung up on meeting the practices, providing evidence. What we hear this all the time is, well, we want to use CMMI or CMMC or whatever model, ISO, whatever. Tell us what evidence to produce. And what they're doing is they're basically saying, how do I pass the audit? How do I pass the appraisal? Yeah. And so the first thing I would do as an entrepreneur is not worry about passing the audit. I wouldn't think about the audit, and I wouldn't think about the model. Remember, these models are nothing but a definition of goodness. Think of it that way. Now, are they incomplete? Yes. Are they mature? No. But they're the best definition of goodness we have. right? So start thinking about what being good at what you do means. And in this case, it's cybersecurity, of course, but in my company's case, it's more engineering and software related. So what do the really great companies do? Well, they plan really well. These are CMMI metaphors. They plan really well, and they do great estimating, and they do code reviews, and they do peer reviews, and they have robust testing, and they do all these great things. Okay. Well, I should do those things too, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, so what does a great cyber company do? Well, they have a great, cybersecurity. They have a great plan. They have great policies in place. They have the right hardware in place. Oh, let's do all that. Right. So really stepping back and saying, forget about these models. What does it take to really be the best at what we do in this area? Right. Because all these models it's a definition of goodness, starting with I'm just starting out being good to I'm getting better at being good to I'm really awesome at being good. Right. Those are the three levels. And then beyond that, it's more about metrics, and focus on that. Focus on being really good. And once you start getting a handle on that, and you're measuring and you're validating that you actually are doing those things, then pull out the model and say, okay, how do we compare to this? Oh, we have a few holes here and there. We have a few holes here and there. Let's fill them in. But that's not what a lot of companies do. What a lot of them do is look at the model first and say, practice 1 says I must have a plan. Okay, you go make a plan. Practice 2 says you must have sign-in sheets at the door. Okay, go create some sign-in sheets. Instead of stepping back and saying, when someone walks into our facility, what are the things we should do to make sure that the security, that we have security? Oh, we have to know who's in the building. We have to have locks on the door. We have to have someone at the front or some way of verifying all these things. We know all these things, right? Well, let's make sure we're doing all these things, and then use that model as kind of a gap analysis tool to say, what do we miss? What can we improve on? And then use it to check yourselves over time to make sure that you're actually improving and getting better. And then, and only then, you should call up that auditor or assessor or appraiser and say, I think we're ready to have a level 3 appraisal now.
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
That's a great practical overview of, and it actually, frankly, I think, refutes all the arguments about kind of audit and just studying to pass the test. And because in the way you described it, you'll actually get better cybersecurity out of it, which is ultimately the purpose.
That's definitely the purpose. And, it's anytime you put an assessment, audit, whatever you want to call it, process between your company and a contract, you're going to have varying degrees of interest in improvement versus passing the test, right? Your vice president of business development is going to be focused like a laser on passing the test.
Sure.
Your CEO, your COO is going to be like, oh, we need to improve performance because that makes everybody's life easier and better, and we'll have less breaches, and then it'll be better for the company. And the CEO is sitting there she's trying to balance those two interests, right? So we'll often hear companies say, oh, we really want to improve, but as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a lot of that, and you're going to have companies that say, honestly, we don't care about improvement. How can we just pass the test? And then we're going to have companies that are really focused on actually protecting the data and protecting national security. So we'll just have to see how that shakes out with CMMC.
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's a large enough community. You're going to have those varying degrees of seriousness. Now you said not to kind of jump right to the model and read the model, but for the companies out there in the audience and sometimes it's hard to believe, but we talk to companies every day who are just finding out about this, and kind of oftentimes it starts with we're almost the bearers of bad news, like, hey, when did they come up with this, and why didn't anyone tell me? So where can those companies, any resources you'd point those companies to in terms of where they should start their journey to CMMC compliance?
Well, I don't think it hurts anybody to get basic training. When I say don't read the model, I mean, don't sort of slavishly follow it step by step and trying to do an implementation. But I think that we're about to see the opening up of the certified professional training, which is a really good cert for someone who wants to get involved and understand CMMC. But the AB also sponsors some training. They call it the registered practitioner training, and that's more of a high level view. So those are really good resources. But there's a ton of webinars out there. I mean, I've been on more than 100 this year. Webinars, high level training, just search YouTube. There's so much out there. I haven't seen any good books about CMMC yet. I'm sure there are some. I just haven't seen them myself. But, there's a lot of resources on the web, and companies like yours that are, doing good things like this conference. I think there's lots of resources on the internet for this.
Now, tell me if you'd agree with this, Jeff, because one of the things that I find with resources when customers are kind of, and I understand, overwhelmed with some of the resources, I always encourage them, but I'd like to hear your view, even if it's counter, is there's a lot of content kind of that's inside baseball, right? Like the ISO flows into CMMC this way and it incorporates this, and here's kind of the CMMC AB and describes the ecosystem, and it's all super interesting. But if you're focused on actually getting better at cybersecurity, maybe not the right place to start is kind of learning all the nuances of the ecosystem. And I kind of I encourage people to not try to become an umpire of kind of the CMMC league.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I go back to what I said a few minutes ago and just reiterate that, don't worry. For me, I don't worry about any of that. I mean, I know it's out there, and I know people that know it all, and I can ask them. But, I like to focus on, remember another word we hear about used with maturity a lot is capability, right? So people struggle with the word maturity because they don't know quite what it means. Like, maturity model. Okay, well, I'm not sure. That means I'm going to get audited, right? But if you substitute in CMMI, we have the word capability built into it. So it's the capability maturity model. And while everybody focuses on the word maturity with CMMC, I like to get people focused on the word capability, because you're building capability. That's what you're doing. And going back to, trying to be as good as you can at whatever level you are, building the capabilities to protect your data is what you should be focusing on, not all the nuances and all the individual little things about passing the appraisal or the assessment. Focus on being as good as you can be at a given level. So I really want to focus on level 1. I want to be as good as I can at, basic cyber hygiene. And, I'll use the model to help me, find my gaps and help me that way. But I'm really just going to focus on being good and as good as I can and building that capability. And I don't care if this practice came from NIST or ISO or how it all came together. It's good that people did that work behind the scenes and didn't, reinvent the wheel. That's a good thing. But really just focus on goodness and being good at what you do, because, and I don't know, I always get people sometimes roll their eyes when I say that, because they're like, oh, it's kind of Pollyanna, just be as good as you can be, but I swear I've been doing this a long time. It really works. It's just like, just try to, don't worry about what anybody else says. Just be as good as you can be in your company, and you'll be closer than you think to being level 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Yeah,
no, I think that do the next right thing and you'll be amazed how kind of in hindsight you've done a bunch of right things and it builds momentum. That kind of strikes an optimistic tone, and I think it's the correct one. I think that optimism actually is needed, and it leads me to my next question. With smaller companies, we often hear about the disadvantages, usually cost being the one that's bandied about the most. But do you think small companies have any advantages in terms of trying to meet CMMC?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, one of the beautiful things about about maturity models is that they're designed to be tailorable. And the CMMC isn't any different. It's designed to be tailorable. In other words, the evidence presented to determine whether a practice is satisfied in a 10-person company could very well be very different than the evidence presented in a 5,000-person company. And that's because the process doesn't need to necessarily be as rigorous. Or you take something like training in a 5-person company where everybody works in the same room. Training is a heck of a lot easier than, say, at Northrop Grumman, right? Mm-hmm. So smaller companies have the ability to define policy and process and deploy that much more quickly. And a lot of what's in a maturity model is process driven. It's how are we going to do this? So I call them how-ability models sometimes. It's like, how are we going to do these things, right? And it's, having a process is really just a two-dimensional manifestation of the desired behavior, or how are we going to do it, right? So a model defines the how, and smaller companies can define and deploy the how much faster than larger companies. And so that's an advantage there, because the pre-work, in other words, the design and build portion of this project could be substantially smaller than, say, that it might be for Boeing, for instance, or even a 500-person contractor, which is still considered small. So the ramp up is most likely, and I keep hedging a little bit because there are situations that are more complex, but for the most part, smaller companies are going to have an easier time defining policy, defining process, doing training, doing quality, collecting metrics. All of those things are part of the CMMC. They're going to have an easier time rolling those things out than a really large company that doesn't have them, all things being equal, right? And the assessment effort and cost will be smaller also, because they have a much smaller implementation and a much smaller scope, much smaller enclave, for instance. So there are advantages to being a small company with something like this.
Yeah, and I think you tell me, that I think the model actually allows for and encourages that, right? There's a practicality, I think, built into the model around whether you're in the assessment phase, the implementation phase, the management phase, wherever you are in your journey. The model isn't pushing you to a standard that doesn't make sense for your business, I don't believe. I mean, I think it allows for what you just mentioned.
Well, there's an assessment guide that the DoD developed that sort of defines the internal meaning of each of the practices. But the nice thing about assessments versus audits is, audits are kind of, I always think of audits as sort of yes or no answers to things. And assessments are more like, how did you do that? And within the context of your environment, does that meet the standard? Right? And so, again, the 5-person context of having a daily meeting is very different than a 5,000 person context of having a meeting, right? We might probably have to have many meetings. So, there is a contextual nature to any kind of maturity model and to anything that's an assessment rather than an audit. And that's one of the reasons we chose the word assessment, because we wanted to convey, and we convey in the training also, that there's a contextualization based on the business environment and the goals and objectives of the organization that's important.
Yeah, and you mentioned the training again, and I've done this in the past too, and I'll put a plug out there for the RP training, the registered practitioner training. It's phenomenal. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a great way to kind of get up to speed. And even if you're not interested in the inside baseball stuff, it gives you a great idea of the way to start to step into this, and it shows you that there are many ways to potentially step into this. There is not a way, and one size fits all.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, Ben Chubinay, who was the lead for that and the training committee, really did a great job putting the RP training together. And now we have professional staff working on the training, and they are coming out with some really new and interesting, exciting things in the RP program. So stay tuned for that for sure.
That's great. And last question, Jeff, you've been super generous with your time. I'd love to hear, and I really sincerely hats off to you and everyone on the board, past and present, or the accreditation body and in the ecosystem. I really think a lot of great work has gone into this by a lot of people who are still with the CMMC ecosystem and who aren't. And so almost 2 years into your journey with the CMMC accreditation body, what are you most encouraged by?
I'm most encouraged by the amount of conversations that are happening. It seems to dominate social media. It seems no matter what the conference is, they're talking about CMMC. I keynoted recently at a conference on retirement planning systems for state of Florida, and they had a whole day on CMMC. And it's like ISACA, who is, they do a lot of cyber certs, but they also do CMMI. Their conferences are dominated by CMMC. PMI, I just had a call to do a keynote at a PMI national symposium. Can you talk about CMMC? So it's like everybody's talking about CMMC, and I think that's fabulous because nobody was talking about cybersecurity 2 years ago. Nobody. And, to the average American, cybersecurity is about, did my Target card information get stolen, right? And right around that time, nobody really realized that the Chinese government had a version of the F-35 that they got basically for free because they snatched it off, some servers on the internet. And when you think it through, or, some things that were going on with the smart grid, for instance, that's downright scary. And, so I'm so excited that everybody's talking about this now. And I mean, even my parents, they're 95 years old. My dad's like, should I get a new virus checker? Is mine working? And even with my own business, like we went through a massive upgrade this year on our cyber, how we store data and the CSP we're using and all of that, because it's constantly on our mind. So that's the most exciting part, I think.
Yeah, and it's wonderful actually to hear that, because you're right. People weren't talking about this a couple of years ago. And what I love is that beyond talking about it, there's actual action. There's a lot of good stuff being done, and it's a credit to so many people in the community. It's the right thing for the country.
And I'm really excited to see some of these firms that, have been struggling to get leadership attention, and, because of that funding, are now just really, really doing great because they're getting the attention they need to be getting, and they're talking to the people they need to talk to because the customers want to talk to you. And I know, the cyber consulting is probably a little bit like process consulting in that it's not always easy to get, the CEO of the company to pick up the phone and talk about, hey, let's talk about process, or let's talk about cyber. But now they want to talk to you. They're calling the consultants now. So I think that's great.
Yeah, CMMC has given really companies the burning platform. I'm a former global CISO, and the biggest thing to my success as a CISO was executive support, and CMMC is the burning platform to go get executive support.
Yeah, and we're really working hard to try to keep everybody on the straight and narrow, and we often get calls saying this company said this or this company did that, and we think that's wrong, and we take if they're part of our ecosystem, we take action on that, and we get in the middle of it and say you can't do that. And so anytime there's this kind of burning platform at this scale, there's going to be top performers and there's going to be bottom feeders, right? That's just that's just the way this world works, right? Anybody who doesn't agree with that hasn't done it. And I'm just hoping that, and I have it in the CMMI world too. We have top performers and we have bottom feeders, and we have all kinds of in the middle, of course, but hopefully we'll be able to have mostly top performers, and we'll deal with the problems, as they come up.
No, I believe you will. Jeff Dalton, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Eric.
You're super generous, and I think this is a great message for our audience. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Great event. Appreciate it.
Now we're going to take a short break. Feel free to explore the venue. Be sure to check out all the exhibitor booths, our Black Belt Wall of Fame, and get your copy of the 2021 CMMC ebook.